Recently, my girlfriend Laura and I moved into a rented house in a suburban town on Long Island. We were excited about the move because the house was comfortable and spacious, perfect for starting a new phase of our lives together. The house was in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and seemingly friendly neighbors. Our new home had a well-kept garden and a cozy porch. It seemed like the ideal place to build happy memories. However, we soon realized something was off in the neighborhood. Next door, there was another house that always seemed to be watching us. On the upper floor of the neighboring house, two male individuals, possibly a middle-aged couple, frequently watched us through the window. Their constant staring was unsettling and made us feel uncomfortable in our own home. Determined to resolve the situation, I decided to introduce myself to the neighbors. I knocked on their door and was greeted by a young man who opened it, but he didn't respond to my attempts at conversation and quickly shut the door. This was just the beginning of the strange incidents we were about to face. After that frustrating first encounter, the following days brought more disturbing signs. Laura and I constantly noticed the two men watching us from the upper window of the neighboring house. Their fixed gazes, even from a distance, caused growing discomfort. It seemed that at any time of the day, one of them would be there, spying on us. One day, I decided to try making contact again. It was important for me to understand what was happening and hopefully ease the growing tension. I knocked on the neighbor's door, and after a few moments, the young man I had seen before opened it. His eyes avoided mine, and he seemed uneasy. "Hi, my name is Jake. I live next door with my girlfriend Laura. I just wanted to introduce myself and get to know you," I said, trying to sound friendly. The young man kept the door slightly open, his expression one of discomfort. He didn't respond, just gave a vague nod and quickly shut the door. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something was definitely not right. I returned to our house where Laura was anxiously waiting for me. I told her what had happened, and we both agreed that we needed to be more aware of our surroundings. The constant presence of those men and their refusal to interact with us were clear signs that something was wrong with that neighboring house. A few days after my frustrating attempt to make contact, things started to get worse. Laura and I were settling in for the night when suddenly we heard soft knocks on the backyard glass window. Laura looked at me, scared. I went to the window but saw no one outside. "It must be the wind or some animal," I tried to reassure her, but I knew I wasn't convinced. The knocking continued on the following nights, always on the same window, always at the same time. The tension increased with each sound. They weren't natural noises, and the regularity of the knocks was disturbing. One night, I decided to wait near the window, hoping to catch the culprit in the act. I waited in vain as the knocks started, only when I stepped away for a moment. Laura was becoming increasingly nervous. "Jake, this isn't normal. We need to do something," she said, her voice trembling with worry. I agreed with her. The situation was becoming unbearable. The next day, I went to the local police to report what was happening. They promised to patrol the neighborhood, but it didn't seem like a priority to them. We returned home with the feeling that we were alone in this fight. The knocking continued, and soon the strange noises began to increase. We heard footsteps in the backyard, whispers that seemed to come from inside our own house. Our nights turned into a torment of anxiety and fear. With every sound, our hearts raced, and the feeling of being watched never left us. For a brief period, everything was calm. The mysterious knocking stopped, and the strange noises ceased. Laura and I finally managed to sleep a few nights without interruptions, starting to believe that the worst had passed. One morning, while having coffee, Laura commented, "Maybe whoever was bothering us has given up." I agreed, but I couldn't shake a lingering unease in the back of my mind. A few days later, just as we started to relax and believe everything was returning to normal, a new fear set in. It was a quiet night when we heard the first screams. They came from the neighbor's house, the same place where the men constantly watched us. The screams were loud and desperate, cutting through the night's silence like a knife. Laura looked at me, terrified. "Jake, did you hear that?" she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Yes, I heard," I responded, trying to stay calm. "It sounds like it's coming from next door." The screams continued for a few minutes and then abruptly stopped, leaving a heavy, oppressive silence. The atmosphere in our house became even more tense. We felt as if something terrible was about to happen. The next morning, Laura suggested we call the police again. This time, we would report the screams we heard. When the police arrived, we did our best to explain everything. The constant watching, the mysterious knocking, and now the screams. They promised to investigate, but found no visible signs of anything wrong in the neighboring house. Despite the police's promises, the feeling of insecurity persisted. We were constantly on alert, fearing the next sound, the next knock, the next scream. The temporary calm only heightened our nervousness, making every sound seem like a potential sign of danger, worry. The nights became a torment. Laura and I could no longer relax, always expecting the next incident. Even during the day, we felt a constant presence, a sense that we were being watched. The screams from the neighbor's house still echoed in our minds, and the lack of answers from the police didn't help at all. One night, while trying to sleep, I began reflecting on everything that had happened. Moving to Long Island was supposed to be a fresh start, but instead, it brought a series of disturbing events that we couldn't explain or control. I thought about the two men in the window, the mysterious knocking, the screams. Everything felt like a nightmare from which we couldn't wake up. Laura turned to me in bed, her eyes reflecting the same worry I felt. "Jake, what are we going to do?" she whispered. "We can't go on like this." "I know, Laura. We have to make a decision," I replied, trying to hide my own anxiety. "We'll keep monitoring the situation. Anything strange, we'll call the police again. And if it doesn't get better, maybe we'll have to consider moving." She nodded, although the idea of moving again seemed as exhausting as facing the disturbing events. We decided to install some security cameras around the house to at least have some sense of control over the situation. In the following days, we remained vigilant. I regularly checked the camera recordings, looking for any sign of the men or any suspicious activity. Every sound, every unusual movement put us on high alert. The situation was draining. The fear of not knowing what the neighbors might do next was paralyzing. But at the same time, it forced us to be more cautious, more aware of our surroundings. We knew we couldn't continue living this way indefinitely, but for now, our only choice was to remain vigilant and protect our home as best as we could. The sleepless nights and constant worry became our new reality, and despite all the fear, one thing was certain: we wouldn't let them break us. We would continue fighting for our peace and security, even if it meant always being on guard. I live with my wife, Amanda, and our twin sons, Ethan and Lucas. Our house is an old building, full of history and charm, but it also carries that slightly haunted air that comes with older homes. Located in a quiet neighborhood, the house has a large backyard where the boys love to play and explore. Less than a year ago, a new neighbor moved into the house next door. His name is Frank. Initially, he seemed like an ordinary man, perhaps a bit too reserved. We didn't exchange many words beyond the occasional greeting when we crossed paths. He always kept his curtains closed and was rarely seen outside. In the first few months, everything seemed normal, but as time passed, I noticed that Frank often watched our backyard through a window that had a direct view of where Ethan and Lucas usually played. This feeling of being watched started to bother Amanda and me, but we tried to ignore it, thinking it might just be our imagination. The house, despite being old, has always been a safe and welcoming home for our family. The creaking of the floorboards and the whispers of the walls were part of its character, and we got used to these sounds as if they were old friends. But with Frank's presence, something seemed out of place, as if the peace we had there was gradually being invaded by an unsettling shadow. I began to notice that Frank spent more time than usual at the window, watching the backyard. Ethan and Lucas were always full of energy, running and laughing while playing with their toys. What should have been a comforting sight started to become disturbing with Frank's constant presence. One afternoon, while they were playing hide and seek, Ethan came up to me and said he saw flashes of light coming from the neighbor's house. "Dad, I think someone is taking pictures of us," he said, his eyes wide with concern. Lucas reported the same thing the next day. I talked to Amanda, and our concern grew. We wondered what Frank was doing and why he seemed so interested in the boys' play. We decided it was time to talk to Frank, but he rarely left his house, and when he did, he avoided any prolonged interaction. In the days that followed, Frank's presence at the window became almost constant. Every time we looked, there he was, silently watching. The feeling of being watched became unbearable. Amanda and I started thinking about measures to protect our children, but we didn't want to make hasty decisions without concrete evidence. Even so, Frank's behavior was becoming increasingly disturbing. As the days went by, Frank's behavior only got worse. He started appearing at odd hours, always watching our house. One night, around 2 in the morning, Amanda woke up with a strange feeling. When she looked out the bedroom window, she saw Frank in the middle of the yard, just standing, staring at our house. She woke me up, and together we watched in silence, trying to understand what he was doing there. As soon as Frank realized we were watching, he turned and quickly went back into his house. The incidents didn't stop there. On another occasion, while I was in the garage organizing some tools, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly and saw Frank standing at the entrance, with a disconcerting smile on his face. He just muttered something incomprehensible and slowly walked away, leaving me with a chill down my spine. These events started to affect our family life. Amanda and I had constant discussions about how to deal with the situation. She wanted to confront Frank directly, but I feared that it might make things worse. We discussed the possibility of installing security cameras, but we knew it could take some time and wouldn't guarantee an immediate solution to the problem. Our children were also beginning to feel the effects. Ethan and Lucas no longer wanted to play in the yard, saying they felt watched. This broke our hearts because their safety and happiness were our top priorities. Something needed to be done, but we were unsure about the best course of action. The tension in our house was palpable, and Frank's constant presence was like a shadow we couldn't shake off. That night, we were all trying to relax in the living room. Ethan and Lucas were on the floor playing a board game while Amanda and I were watching a show on TV. Suddenly, Lucas let out a sharp scream and pointed to the window. "Dad, there's someone outside." I ran to the window and saw a silhouette quickly moving away toward Frank's house. Panic set in. Amanda grabbed the phone and called the police while I tried to calm the boys, who were visibly terrified. When the police arrived, I explained the situation, detailing Frank's disturbing behaviors over the past few weeks. The officers knocked on his door, and to our surprise, he came out calmly with a smile on his face, as if nothing had happened. "Good evening, officers. How can I help?" Frank asked, in a calm voice that contrasted with the tension in the air. The officers explained the reason for their visit and asked about his presence in our yard. Frank categorically denied it, claiming he had been home all night. He even suggested that perhaps our kids had imagined the figure at the window, which made me furious. The officers, however, did a quick sweep of his yard, but found no conclusive evidence. They told us they would do more frequent patrols in the area and advised us to install security cameras as soon as possible. Amanda and I felt powerless. The police visit seemed to have made no difference, and the sense of security we once had in our home was rapidly disappearing. We knew something had to be done to protect our family, but we weren't sure what else we could do. In the days following the incident, Amanda and I discussed extensively what we should do. The feeling of insecurity permeated every corner of our house, and I could see the constant fear in Ethan and Lucas's eyes. Frank's presence continued to haunt us, and even with the police patrols, we couldn't relax. One night, after the boys had gone to bed, Amanda and I had a serious conversation in the living room. "David, I can't live like this anymore. We can't stay here with this constant shadow over our heads," she said, her voice trembling with concern. I knew she was right. We needed to protect our family, and the only way to do that was to get away from that toxic environment. We decided that the best option was to move to a place where we could start fresh, away from Frank and the disturbing events that haunted us. We started looking for a new house immediately. We wanted a place that would provide us with the security and tranquility we had lost. Within a few weeks, we found a house in a more secluded neighborhood where we hoped our children could play in the yard without fear. On moving day, I looked one last time at the house we once considered a safe and happy home. The sense of relief was palpable, but there was also a deep sadness. We had been forced to leave because of the behavior of a man who, in less than a year, turned our lives into a nightmare. As we drove to our new home, I reflected on everything that had happened. It was frightening to think how someone like Frank could enter our lives and cause so much chaos. I promised myself that from now on, I would be more vigilant about my family's safety. The experience taught us the importance of trusting our instincts and the need to protect those we love. Upon arriving at the new house, we started unpacking and organizing our things. Despite the recent trauma, there was a sense of hope in the air. We knew that, with time, security and peace would return. I looked at Amanda, Ethan, and Lucas and realized that no matter where we were, we would be fine as long as we were together. Our new home represented a new beginning, and we were determined to leave the past behind and focus on building a safe and happy future for our family. I am a young college student. I live with my roommates, Rachel and Emma, in a comfortable apartment. Next to our apartment, there was a vacant unit, which gave us a sense of privacy. One night, we started hearing strange sounds coming from the neighboring apartment. There were drilling and hammering noises at completely inappropriate times, like in the middle of the night. At first, we tried to ignore them, but the noises continued and began to unsettle us. I decided I needed to confront the people making the noise. I went to the apartment next door and knocked on the door. To my surprise, it was opened by a man who looked suspicious. "Hi, could you please stop making so much noise? It's bothering us," I said, trying to sound firm. Before he could respond, two other men approached in an intimidating manner. One of them smiled in a disturbing way while the other just stared at me. I felt a chill down my spine and quickly apologized, hurrying back to my apartment with my heart racing. That night, we didn't hear any more noise from the apartment next door. The absolute silence was unnerving, making me even more uncomfortable. I tried to sleep, but every little noise made me jump out of bed. I spent the night restless, worried about what might happen. The next day, I found Rachel and Emma in the kitchen. I asked if they had heard the noises too, and Rachel confirmed that she had, while Emma said she only heard some distant sounds. This confirmed that it wasn't just my imagination. We talked about the situation and our concerns about the men in the neighboring apartment. We decided that we needed to stay vigilant and perhaps inform the building manager about what had happened. Even after reporting the situation to the building manager, the feeling of unease didn't leave me. The silence of that night and the intensity of the fear we felt left a deep mark. A few days passed without incident, but the worry about the men possibly returning persisted. We were constantly on alert, analyzing every sound, every movement, even the most subtle ones. I reflected a lot on the experience. I never imagined something like this could happen in the place we live. It made me realize the importance of always being vigilant and trusting my instincts. I learned that we shouldn't ignore warning signs, no matter how small, and that safety should always be a priority. The following nights were restless. Every small noise seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. We slept with the hallway lights on, and Rachel and Emma agreed to keep their phones charged and within reach in case we needed to call for help quickly. The story ended with a constant feeling of apprehension. Even with the intervention of the building manager and the possibility of involving the police, the experience left a mark on us. We knew we needed to be cautious and attentive to any signs of danger. That episode taught us the importance of always being prepared and never underestimating our concerns. My name is Jack, and together with my wife Emily, we recently moved into a house in a quiet neighborhood. The house was exactly what we were looking for, spacious with a beautiful garden and located on a calm street, ideal for starting a new chapter in our lives. In the first few days, we were delighted by the tranquility of the place. The neighbors seemed friendly, though reserved. The house next to ours belonged to an elderly couple, whom we found out were named Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. From the beginning, something caught our attention. We never saw the Thompsons leave their house. We spent hours in the garden tending to the plants, and no matter the time, the curtains in the house next door were always closed, and the door never opened. We commented on this several times, but eventually dismissed it, thinking they might be reclusive people who valued their privacy. However, as the months went by, we began to notice other strange things that increased our curiosity and concern. This was the beginning of a series of disturbing events that would change our perception of that seemingly perfect neighborhood. The Thompsons' house, with its always dark windows and the absence of any signs of life, started to occupy our thoughts more and more until we could no longer ignore what was happening next door. After a few months, a strange smell started emanating from the Thompsons' house. At first, we thought it could be something trivial, like garbage or spoiled food, but the odor intensified over time, becoming unbearable. We couldn't open our windows without being overwhelmed by the nauseating smell. One night, while discussing what to do, Emily pointed to the windows of the neighbor's house. "Look, Jack, there's something strange there," she said, her voice tense. Looking at the windows, I saw shadows moving slowly, as if someone was walking through the house. It was disturbing, considering we had never seen the Thompsons come or go. We decided it was time to do something. We went to their house and knocked on the door. We waited a few minutes, but no one answered. We tried a few more times, increasing the volume of our knocks, but still, there was no response. I looked at Emily and saw the concern reflected in her eyes. "Maybe they're sleeping," Emily suggested, trying to stay calm. However, the combination of the smell and the shadows in the windows was too unsettling to ignore. We returned to our house, but spent the night wide awake, discussing what might be happening next door. The situation was becoming increasingly strange, and we began to consider the possibility that something was very wrong with the Thompsons. Our concern for the Thompsons would not let us rest. We decided we needed to investigate further. One night, when the smell became unbearable, Emily and I decided to observe the neighbor's house more closely. With flashlights in hand, we left our house and cautiously approached the Thompsons' house. From the outside, the house looked even more ominous at night. We circled the property, staying in the shadows to avoid drawing attention. We got close to the windows and shining our flashlights inside, we saw the shadows clearly. But when we focused the light, what we saw left us stunned. The shadows were actually mannequins carefully positioned in the windows, dressed in regular clothes. The macabre detail of the mannequins made our hearts race. It was as if someone wanted the house to look inhabited, despite the visible absence of the Thompsons. "This is sick," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. The sight of the mannequins was disturbing and raised more questions than it answered. Who would do this, and why? We decided we needed to take it a step further. The unbearable smell and the discovery of the mannequins made us realize the situation was much more serious than we had imagined. We needed to find out what was really happening inside that house. The discovery of the mannequins left us deeply unsettled. Emily and I decided we couldn't leave the situation as it was. We needed to investigate more thoroughly. The next night, taking advantage of the silence and darkness, we entered the Thompsons' house. We forced open a window at the back and went in, holding our flashlights tightly. The smell was far worse than we expected. Following the nauseating odor, we were led to the basement. With each step, our hearts pounded harder. As we descended the stairs, the sight that awaited us was horrifying. There were several dead animals scattered across the floor. The horror of the scene made my stomach churn, and I saw Emily cover her mouth, trying to hold back vomit. We tried to understand what we were seeing, but soon we encountered an even more shocking truth. In a dark corner of the basement, we found the bodies of the Thompsons, sitting in chairs, with expressions of pain and suffering frozen on their faces. It was evident they had been dead for months. As we absorbed the horror of the discovery, we heard footsteps behind us. We turned around, and to our shock, we saw a strange man, dirty and disheveled, holding a knife. His eyes were wide, and he stared at us with a crazed smile. "I see you found my secrets," he said in a low and menacing voice. We realized he was the one manipulating the Thompsons' bodies and the mannequins to give the impression the house was still inhabited. He had been using the house as a hideout, and our appearance threatened his safety. Terrified, Emily and I slowly backed away, trying not to provoke the man. With our hearts racing, I signaled for Emily to run for the exit. As the man moved towards us, we ran as fast as we could, up the stairs and out and through the back window. We ran to our house and immediately called the police, reporting everything we had discovered. While we waited for the authorities to arrive, we hugged each other, still trembling with fear and shock. When the police arrived, we made sure to report every detail of our discovery. The officers listened attentively, and soon an investigation team was sent to the Thompsons' house. They entered cautiously, prepared for the worst. While the officers combed through the basement, Emily and I waited outside, trying to calm down. A few minutes later, one of the officers returned, confirming our suspicions. They found the bodies of the Thompsons and the strange man hiding in the basement. He was immediately arrested, screaming incoherent things as he was taken to the patrol car. The investigators informed us that the man was a fugitive, wanted for several crimes, and that he had been hiding in the Thompsons' house after killing them months ago. He used the mannequins to create the illusion that the house was inhabited, thus avoiding suspicion, while using the house as a hideout. The police also found evidence that the man had been collecting dead animals, though the reasons for this remained a disturbing mystery. We were praised for our courage and cooperation, but the experience left us deeply shaken. In the following days, Emily and I tried to return to our normal lives, but the sense of security we once had in our home was completely shattered. Every strange sound, every shadow in the window made us relive the terror of that night. Finally, after much discussion and reflection, we decided we couldn't continue living in that neighborhood. The house we once considered our refuge was now a constant reminder of a lived nightmare. We found a new place in a more secluded neighborhood where we hoped to rebuild our sense of security and peace. As we packed our things, we reflected on how much life can change so unexpectedly. The experience taught us the importance of trusting our instincts and being always aware of what's happening around us. Leaving that house behind was difficult, but we knew it was the best thing for our sanity and safety. We moved, carrying with us the lessons learned and the hope for a new beginning. Although the trauma still follows us, we know that together we can face any challenge life throws at us. My name is Sarah, a 32-year-old single woman living alone in a small apartment in the city. The building where I live is relatively quiet, with friendly neighbors and a welcoming atmosphere. It's a place where people greet each other in the hallways, and life goes on normally. My apartment is on the second floor, a cozy space with a compact living room, a functional kitchen, a bedroom, and a bathroom. The windows in my bedroom and living room overlook a tree-lined street, and I've always enjoyed the sense of privacy my apartment provided. However, I started to notice something strange. My neighbors in the apartment next door, an apparently ordinary couple, seemed to know intimate details about my life that I never shared with anyone. Casual comments about my routine, my likes, and even conversations I had on the phone started to come up in the few times we met in the hallway or the elevator. One afternoon, while waiting for the elevator, my neighbor said, "I see you like chamomile tea. I love having it before bed too." I was surprised because I didn't remember mentioning that to her. On another occasion, her husband commented on a specific series I was watching on Netflix, something I always watched alone late at night. Initially, I thought maybe these were just coincidences, or that I had mentioned these things without remembering. But as the days went by, the frequency of these comments increased, and I started to feel that something wasn't right. The idea that my neighbors knew so much about my personal life without me telling them became increasingly disturbing. That's when I started paying more attention to what was happening around me. One night, while trying to sleep, I heard whispers coming from the wall that divided my apartment from theirs. They were low voices, as if discussing something, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. It made me uneasy, but I still tried to ignore it, thinking I might be overreacting. The first signs that something was very wrong began to accumulate, and my sense of security started to crumble. I knew I needed to find out what was happening and protect my privacy. One night, while trying to fall asleep, I again heard whispers coming through the walls. This time, the voices were clearer and seemed to be discussing something about me. I lay still in bed, trying to catch every word, but the conversation was too quiet for me to fully understand. The feeling of being watched became increasingly disturbing. The next morning, I found a folded note left at my door. I opened it with trembling hands and read, "We love your new haircut. It really suits you." I was shocked because I had just cut my hair the previous afternoon and hadn't seen anyone since. How could they know that? Every day, more notes appeared, always with personal details that no one should know. "Hope your job interview went well," or "That soup you made last night smelled delicious." It was as if they were inside my apartment, watching every move. My concern grew by the minute. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and completely invaded. My attempts to confront the neighbors were frustrating. They always denied knowing anything and acted overly friendly, which only increased my suspicion. The constant feeling of being watched started to affect my sleep and peace of mind. I knew something needed to be done, but I wasn't sure what to do next. The idea that someone could be spying on my private life and leaving these notes began to consume my thoughts. The security and privacy I valued so much in my apartment were being destroyed, and I needed to find a way to reverse it. I decided I needed to take action. I couldn't keep living with that constant feeling of being watched. I bought some security cameras and installed them in strategic points around my apartment, hoping to capture any suspicious activity. Every corner of my home was now monitored, and I felt a bit safer, at least temporarily. That night, I anxiously reviewed the camera recordings. Soon, I noticed something strange, small points of light crossing the walls in different parts of the apartment. Upon closer investigation, I discovered they were tiny holes, imperceptible to the naked eye, strategically drilled to allow my neighbors to spy on my daily life. With my heart racing, I continued to review the recordings and realized these holes weren't the only invasion. The cameras picked up strange sounds, noises from electronic devices that didn't belong to me. With a bit more investigation, I found small microphones hidden in discreet places, like behind the furniture and inside the outlets. My neighbors had gone too far. The horror of the discovery left me in shock. Knowing they weren't just spying on my life visually, but also listening to all my conversations, turned my apartment, once a safe haven, into a nightmare. Every word I said, every move I made, everything was being monitored. I spent the whole night turning the situation over in my mind. What else could they be doing? What other invasions of privacy had I not yet discovered? The idea that my entire life was being watched and listened to by strangers left me terrified and desperate for a solution. After discovering the holes and microphones, I decided I needed to investigate further. Something told me there were more hidden secrets in my apartment. I spent the day examining every inch of the walls, cabinets, and floors. That's when, at the back of my closet, I found a false wall. With trembling hands, I opened the false wall and discovered a small corridor, a secret access that connected my apartment to my neighbors. The sight made me freeze with fear. This was how they were entering and leaving my apartment without me noticing. The idea that strangers had been inside my personal space, possibly while I was sleeping, was terrifying. With the discovery of this access, I realized I needed to make a quick decision. I couldn't keep living like this. I decided I needed to confront my neighbors or seek immediate help. Armed with my phone and a courage I didn't know I had, I was ready for whatever might happen. At first, I thought about going directly to the neighbor's apartment to confront them, but the risk seemed too high, so I decided to call the police. I described the situation, from the holes in the walls and the microphones to the secret access I had found. The police advised me to leave the apartment and wait for them outside. While I waited, my heart pounded uncontrollably. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow more threatening. Finally, I saw the lights of the patrol cars approaching. The officers arrived, and after explaining everything again, they went to the neighbor's apartment. I stayed outside, watching and hoping that this nightmare would soon end. The police knocked on the neighbor's door, and after a few tense moments, they opened it. I watched from a distance as the officers explained the situation and began to investigate. The feeling of relief mixed with fear still permeated my body, but knowing the police were handling it gave me some comfort. After some time, one of the officers came to inform me that they had found the holes, the microphones, and the secret access exactly as I had described. They arrested the neighbors and took them to the station for further questioning. The confirmation that my neighbors had indeed been spying and invading my privacy was a relief, but also a terrible shock. When the neighbors were taken away, I was called to give a full statement at the station. I detailed every event, from the first whispers to the discovery of the secret access. I showed all the notes they had left at my door and the security camera recordings. The police thanked me for my cooperation and promised to keep me informed about the progress of the case. After this traumatic event, I realized I couldn't continue living in that apartment. The invasion of privacy was so deep that any sense of security there was gone. I decided that the best way to ensure my peace of mind was to move to a new place where I could start fresh without the constant fear of being watched. I found a new apartment in a different neighborhood, and the move was a process of renewal. While organizing my things in the new home, I reflected on how vulnerable I had been and how crucial it is to be aware of signs that something is wrong. This event taught me the importance of protecting my privacy and never underestimating the value of security. Now, in my new apartment, I feel safer and determined not to let fear control my life. The experience left scars, but it also made me stronger, showing me that I can face frightening situations and come out stronger on the other side.